The chrome and leather of Rosie's Roadhouse gleamed under the Nevada desert sun as Maya Rodriguez felt the familiar rumble of a Harley approaching. She'd know that engine anywhere. It belonged to Jake Morrison, the Hell Rider's most feared enforcer, and the father of her unborn child. What she didn't expect was to see him drop to one knee in the dusty parking lot, his usually stone-cold eyes filled with desperation. "Marry me for 1 year, Maya, please, or I'm done." The words hit her harder than the desert wind. This was the same man who'd walked away from her 6 months ago without explanation, the same man whose motorcycle club had secrets darker than the Nevada nights. Maya touched her growing belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing danger. She had no idea that Jake's grandfather's deathbed confession had revealed a family curse, one that could only be broken by a blood heir born within a legal marriage, and that powerful enemies were already closing in. What Jake couldn't tell her was that their child wasn't just his future, it was his only chance at survival. But why was he keeping the truth from the woman carrying his child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya stared down at Jake's weathered face, her heart hammering against her ribs. 6 months. 6 months since he'd left her standing in this very parking lot with nothing but a terse "this ain't gonna work" and the roar of his departing motorcycle. Now here he was, gravel biting into his knees through worn denim, looking like a man staring down the barrel of his own mortality. "Get up, Jake!" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Around them, the usual afternoon crowd of truckers and bikers pretended not to watch while hanging on every word. "You don't get to disappear and then show up here making demands." Jake's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath the 3-day stubble. His leather cut bore the Hell Rider's skull and wings patch, the colors that had always been more important to him than anything else, including her. "It's not a demand. It's a request, a desperate one. Desperate." Maya let the word hang between them like smoke. "That's a new look for you, Reaper." The use of his road name made him flinch. Behind those storm-grey eyes, she caught a flash of something she'd never seen before. Fear, real bone-deep terror that had nothing to do with rival clubs or police raids. Jake Morrison had faced down armed men without blinking, had earned his reputation through violence and unwavering loyalty to the Hell Riders. What could possibly scare a man like that? 1 year, he repeated, slowly rising to his feet. At 6'3", he towered over her, but somehow managed to look smaller than when he'd been kneeling. "That's all I'm asking for. We get married, you keep the baby safe, and after 12 months you never have to see me again if that's what you want." Keep the baby safe from what? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Her protective instincts flared as the child in her womb shifted restlessly. "Jake, what kind of trouble are you in?" His expression shuttered immediately, walls slamming back into place with practiced efficiency. The kind that doesn't involve you unless you make it involve you. "I'm carrying your child. I'm already involved." For a moment his mask slipped again. Jake's gaze dropped to her rounded belly, visible beneath her flowing sundress, and something almost tender flickered across his features. His hand started to reach toward her, then fell back to his side as if he'd caught himself making a mistake. "This is crazy," Maya whispered, though part of her wanted to understand what had driven him here. The Jake she'd known had been passionate but guarded, intense but ultimately unreachable. He'd made it clear from the beginning that the Hell Riders came first, always. She'd foolishly thought love might change that equation. Maybe. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. Nothing fancy but real. "But I wouldn't be here if I had any other choice." The ring caught the desert sunlight, and Maya found herself thinking about the nights they'd spent together in her apartment above the Roadhouse. How he'd traced patterns on her bare skin while she slept. How he'd made coffee for her in the mornings before disappearing for days at a time on club business. How he'd looked at her the night she'd told him about the pregnancy, shocked, terrified, and then utterly blank before he'd walked away. "What happens after the year is up?" she asked quietly. "You're free to go, both of you." I'll sign whatever papers you want, give you whatever money you need to start over somewhere safe. His voice roughened. Somewhere far from here. The admission sent ice through her veins despite the blazing afternoon heat. Whatever Jake was running from, it was big enough that he was willing to let her take his child and disappear forever. The man who'd once told her that family was everything to his people was prepared to sacrifice his own. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the baby's restless movements. When she opened them again, Jake was watching her with the intensity of a man whose life hung in the balance. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya stared at Jake's weathered face, searching for answers in those storm-grey eyes that had once made her forget every rational thought. 6 months had passed since she'd walked away from him, from the chaos of the Steel Serpent's MC, from the constant fear that had gnawed at her bones. Now here he was, kneeling on grimy linoleum like some twisted fairy tale prince. "Get up," she whispered, acutely aware of the curious stares from other patrons. "You're making a scene." Jake remained on one knee, his leather jacket creaking as he shifted. "Not until you hear me out. I heard you fine the first time. The answer is no." Maya pressed her palms against the table, preparing to leave, but Jake's hand shot out to gently grasp her wrist. "Maya, please. I know how this sounds, but—" "Do you?" She yanked her arm free. "Because it sounds like you've lost your mind. A marriage of convenience? What is this, the 19th century?" Jake finally stood, sliding into the booth across from her with the fluid grace that had always reminded her of a predator. Even now, despite everything, her pulse quickened at his proximity. The familiar scent of leather and motor oil mixed with something darker, more dangerous. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't about getting back together or playing house. It's about protection." "Protection from what?" Maya's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. At 12 weeks, the pregnancy wasn't showing yet, but the protective instincts had already kicked in with a ferocity that surprised her. Jake's jaw tightened, and she caught a flicker of something, fear, before his expression hardened again. "There are things about my family you don't know, things I never told you." "Your family?" Maya let out a bitter laugh. "You mean the club?" "I know plenty about the Steel Serpents, thanks. Enough to know I don't want my child anywhere near that world, not the club." Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My blood family. The Morrisons." The name hit her like ice water. She'd heard whispers during her time with Jake, fragments of conversations that stopped when she entered a room. The Morrison name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and terror, even among hardened bikers who feared little. "What about them?" Jake glanced around the diner, his paranoia evident. "My great-grandfather made some bad choices a long time ago, the kind that don't just affect one generation." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "There's a debt, Maya, one that gets passed down through bloodlines." "What kind of debt?" But even as she asked, part of her didn't want to know. She'd spent months building a quiet, normal life, teaching kindergarten, attending prenatal appointments, planning a future free from violence and secrets. "The kind that kills." Jake's eyes met hers, and she saw raw desperation there. "Every Morrison man who's tried to have a family has lost them. My grandfather, my father, my uncle, all dead before their kids turned 5. Maya's blood turned to ice. "That's ridiculous. You're talking about coincidences, not some family curse." "Am I?" Jake pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos with shaking fingers. "Here's my cousin Marcus, shot dead outside his kid's preschool 3 years ago. His son died in a car accident 6 months later." He swiped to another photo. "My brother Tommy, found at the bottom of Perdition Creek with his 2-year-old daughter." The photos blurred as Maya's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "Stop!" "I can't stop. Don't you get it?" Jake's voice cracked. "The moment I found out you were pregnant, I started counting down. They always wait until the kids are born, let you think you're safe, and then—" "Who is they?" Maya demanded. "You keep talking about debts and curses like we're living in some gothic novel. Give me facts, Jake. Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. The Torino family. What my great-grandfather took from them can never be repaid with money. The Italian crime family that controlled the eastern seaboard. Maya's teaching salary didn't exactly keep her informed about organized crime, but even she knew that name. They were old-world ruthless, the kind of people who measured justice in generations. What did he tell their youngest son, their heir? Jake's hands trembled as he reached across the table. Maya, I've spent the last 6 months trying to find another way. Any other way. But there's only one thing that might protect you and the baby. Marriage, she said slowly, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. In their world, family is sacred. If you're legally my wife, you're under their protection as well as their curse. It creates a stalemate. Jake's fingers brushed hers. Just until the baby's born. Then we figure out something permanent. Maya stared at their joined hands, her mind reeling. And if I say no? Jake's silence was answer enough. The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Maya's feet, despite the warm September morning. She clutched the manila envelope containing their marriage certificate, the official seal still fresh and slightly raised under her fingertips. Mrs. Maya Morrison. The name felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd forgotten how to pronounce. Jake walked beside her in silence, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked almost like relief. He'd traded his leather cut for a plain black button-down and dark jeans, but he still moved with that predatory grace that had first caught her attention 3 years ago, back when she was stupid enough to think she could tame a man who belonged to the wind and the road. "So what now?" Maya asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. Traffic hummed past them on Main Street, ordinary people living ordinary lives, while hers spiraled into something she couldn't quite comprehend. Jake's phone buzzed against his hip. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. "Now we go home." "You're home," he corrected quickly. "I'll get my stuff and we'll figure out the living arrangements." "Living arrangements?" Maya's voice pitched higher than she intended. "Jake, we're not actually... We have to make this look real, Maya." His grey eyes swept the street, cataloguing faces and license plates with practiced efficiency. "That means living together, acting like a married couple." The baby chose that moment to kick, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. Jake's gaze immediately dropped to her belly, and for a second, his entire expression softened. His hand started to reach toward her, then fell back to his side. "How far along are you exactly?" he asked. 28 weeks. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sunshine. "Jake, what aren't you telling me? Yesterday you wanted nothing to do with this baby, and today you're practically forcing me down the aisle. What changed?" His phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out, read the message, and cursed under his breath. "Get in the truck," he said, already moving toward his black pickup. "We need to go. Now. I have my own car." "Leave it." The edge in his voice made her stomach clench. She'd heard that tone before, usually right before someone ended up in the hospital. "Maya, please, just trust me." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she followed him to the truck. He held the passenger door open for her, his eyes never stopping their surveillance of the street. As soon as she was buckled in, he was around to the driver's side and starting the engine. They drove in tense silence through downtown Millfield, past the diner where they'd had their first official date, past the park where he'd told her he loved her for the first time. Maya watched familiar landmarks blur past the window and wondered if this was what it felt like to disappear from your own life. "There's something you need to know about my family," Jake said finally, turning onto her street. "About why I left." Maya's hands found her belly instinctively. "What kind of something?" "The Morrisons." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "We're not exactly what you'd call normal. There are traditions, expectations, things that get passed down from father to son." "You're being cryptic again." Maya turned in her seat to face him. "Just tell me what's going on." Jake pulled into her driveway and killed the engine. For a long moment he stared at the small blue house she'd bought with her teacher's salary, the white picket fence she'd painted herself last spring. When he looked at her, there was something almost like fear in his eyes. "My grandfather killed 3 men with his bare hands," he said quietly. "My father has 17 confirmed kills, not counting overseas. My brother Cain? Let's just say there's a reason he's called the Grim Reaper of the Devil's Sons." Maya's blood turned to ice water. "Jake, it's in our blood, Maya. This thing, this rage, and it gets stronger every generation." His knuckles were white where he gripped the steering wheel. "I thought if I stayed away, if I didn't claim the baby, maybe it would skip this one. Maybe our child could be normal. What changed your mind?" Jake's phone rang before he could answer. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went pale. "Stay in the truck," he ordered, answering the call. Maya couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she watched Jake's expression grow progressively grimmer. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "What is it?" she whispered. "They know about the baby." Jake's voice was hollow, defeated. "And they're coming to collect what belongs to the family." The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maya stared at the man across from her, searching his weathered face for any sign of deception. Jake's hands wrapped around his coffee cup like it was an anchor, his knuckles scarred from fights she'd rather not think about. The diamond ring sat between them on the scratched formica table, catching the harsh light with each flicker. "You're insane," she whispered, glancing around at the handful of late-night patrons. A trucker hunched over his pie, a waitress refilling sugar dispensers, an elderly man reading yesterday's newspaper. Normal people living normal lives, not sitting across from motorcycle club enforcers discussing fake marriages. "Maybe." Jake's voice was rough, like he'd swallowed gravel. "But I'm also desperate." The word hung between them, heavy with implications Maya wasn't ready to explore. She pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the slight curve that had only recently become noticeable. 4 months along, and already her world had turned upside down twice, first when she discovered the pregnancy, and now this. "Desperate enough to track me down after 8 months of silence." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Desperate enough to follow me to Portland and somehow find out where I work." Something flickered across Jake's features. Guilt, maybe, or something darker. "I've always known where you were." The admission hit her like ice water. "What?" "Maya, listen to me." He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "There are things about my family, about the club, that I never told you, things I hoped you'd never need to know." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, this gets better. Let me guess. You're in witness protection? The FBI? Or maybe you're just a garden variety stalker who's been watching me for months." "My grandfather died last week." The abrupt change of subject threw her off balance. Jake had never mentioned any family except his Mac brothers. She'd assumed he was alone in the world, an orphan who'd found belonging in leather and chrome. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, though confusion colored her tone. "I didn't know you had family." "Neither did I, until his lawyer called." Jake's jaw tightened. Turns out dear old Grandpa Ezra had quite a story to tell, along with the inheritance that comes with some very specific strings attached. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's aggressive air conditioning. "What kind of strings?" "The kind that involve you and our baby." The words settled between them like a physical presence. Maya's hand moved protectively to her stomach again, and she noticed Jake tracking the movement with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "How do you even know about the pregnancy?" "I never told anyone except my doctor and—" She stopped, pieces clicking together in her mind. "Rachel, you've been talking to my sister." Jake didn't deny it. "She's worried about you. Working 2 jobs, living in that shoebox apartment, too stubborn to ask for help. So you thought you'd ride in on your Harley like some twisted knight in shining leather?" Maya's voice rose, earning glances from other patrons. She forced herself to speak more quietly. "I don't need rescuing, Jake, especially not from you." "Actually, you do." His tone was flat, matter-of-fact. "We both do." Before she could respond, the bell above the diner's door chimed. Maya glanced over automatically and felt Jake go rigid beside her. Two men had entered, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing expensive suits that screamed money and power. They didn't look like truckers or late-night coffee seekers. "We need to go," Jake said quietly, already reaching for his wallet. "Right now." "What? Why?" But even as she asked, Maya felt the shift in atmosphere. The suited men were scanning the diner with predatory efficiency, and when one of them spotted their table, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Jake tossed money on the table and stood, his movements careful and controlled. "Back door. Don't look at them. Don't make eye contact. Just walk normally toward the restrooms." Fear crept up Maya's spine. "Jake, what's happening?" "The inheritance I mentioned. It comes with enemies." He positioned himself between her and the suited men, his hand resting casually on something beneath his jacket. "Old debts, older grudges, and some very dangerous people who think our baby is their ticket to collecting what they're owed." Maya's blood turned to ice. "Our baby? What does our baby have to do with any of this?" But Jake was already guiding her toward the back of the diner, his hand warm and firm on her lower back. Behind them, she heard chairs scraping and footsteps that seemed to echo with menace. "I'll explain everything," Jake promised, pushing open the rear exit. "But first, we need to disappear." The alley beyond was dark and narrow, filled with dumpsters and shadows. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as Jake pulled out his phone, speed-dialing someone. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "They found us. We need extraction now." The courthouse steps felt colder than they should have in the September afternoon sun. Maya clutched the manila envelope containing their marriage certificate, her other hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. 3 hours ago, she'd been single and determined to raise her child alone. Now she wore a thin gold band that Jake had produced from seemingly nowhere, and the name Morrison was legally hers. "We need to talk." Jake's voice cut through her swirling thoughts as they reached his motorcycle. The Harley gleamed black and chrome, a machine she'd once loved riding behind him on, her arms wrapped around his leather-clad torso. Now it felt like a symbol of everything dangerous about the man she'd just married. "I think we've done enough for one day." Maya stepped back when he moved to hand her a helmet. "I'll take a cab home." "Like hell you will." His grey eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. "Maya, things are going to happen fast now. I need you to understand." "Understand what?" The words exploded from her before she could stop them. "That you disappeared for 3 months without a word, then showed up begging me to marry you with some cryptic nonsense about protection, that you won't tell me what kind of trouble you're in, but somehow our baby is involved." Jake glanced around the courthouse parking lot, his body language shifting into the hyper-aware stance she remembered from their relationship. He was scanning for threats, she realized. Whatever had him spooked was real and immediate. "Get on the bike," he said quietly. "Please, I'll explain everything once we're somewhere safe." Against her better judgment, Maya found herself accepting the helmet. The familiar routine of climbing behind him, of feeling the powerful engine rumble to life beneath them, sent an unwelcome wave of nostalgia through her chest. Her arms went around his waist automatically, and she felt him tense at the contact. They didn't head toward her apartment. Instead, Jake navigated through downtown traffic toward the industrial district, finally pulling into the parking lot of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Maya's unease spiked as he killed the engine. "Jake, where?" "Safe house," he said, dismounting and offering her his hand. "Club uses it for sensitive conversations." The interior surprised her. What appeared derelict from the outside had been converted into a comfortable living space. Leather furniture, a kitchenette, even a bed tucked into one corner. This wasn't just a meeting place. Someone lived here. "Yours?" she asked. He nodded, pulling off his leather jacket and hanging it on a hook by the door. Underneath, he wore a black t-shirt that showed off the intricate tattoo work covering his arms. Maya had once traced those designs with her fingertips, learning the story each one told. Now she noticed new ink, dark symbols she didn't recognize winding around his left forearm. "I moved here after," he gestured vaguely, "after I found out what was coming for us. Stop being cryptic and just tell me." Maya sat heavily on the couch, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. "I married you, Jake. I think I've earned the truth." For a long moment, he stared at her, conflict written across his angular features. Then he moved to a safe hidden behind a painting of a motorcycle rally, his fingers working the combination with practiced ease. When he turned back, he held a thick folder and what looked like an old leather journal. "My family has enemies," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "Not just the club, my bloodline. The Morrison name carries a debt that goes back generations." Maya frowned. "What kind of debt?" "The kind that gets paid in blood." Jake opened the journal, revealing pages of faded handwriting interspersed with newspaper clippings. "My great-grandfather made a deal during the Depression, borrowed money from the wrong people to keep the family farm. When he couldn't pay it back, he slid a yellowed photograph across the coffee table. It showed a farmhouse, or what was left of one. Blackened timbers, smoke still rising from the ruins. They killed him, his wife, his two youngest sons. Jake's voice had gone flat, emotionless. But my grandfather survived. He was 14, working in the fields when they came. The debt transferred to him." "That's—" Maya picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. "That's insane. People don't inherit financial obligations. These people aren't bound by normal rules." Jake pulled out a modern photograph, a crime scene shot of a man in a morgue. The resemblance to Jake was unmistakable. "That's my cousin Tommy. He tried to run 5 years ago. Started a new life in Oregon. Changed his name, thought he was safe." Maya's stomach clenched. "They found him. They always find us. The debt doesn't die, Maya. It just grows. Interest, penalties, the cost of hunting us down. It's millions now. Money none of us will ever have. Then, how do you break the cycle?" Jake met her eyes, and she saw something she'd never witnessed before in this dangerous, confident man. Fear, raw and bone deep. "You don't break it. You fulfill it. And according to the terms my great-grandfather agreed to." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "The debt can only be paid by the blood of the 7th generation." The pregnancy test slipped from Sarah's trembling fingers, clattering onto the bathroom tiles. 2 pink lines stared back at her like tiny accusers, confirming what her body had been telling her for weeks. Morning sickness, exhaustion, and the strange metallic taste that lingered no matter how many times she brushed her teeth. She was carrying Jake Morrison's child. 6 weeks had passed since she'd thrown him out of her apartment, since she'd discovered the photos hidden in his jacket pocket. Photos of her leaving work, entering her building, sitting in coffee shops she'd never mentioned visiting. He'd been watching her, following her, and when she'd confronted him, his explanation had made everything worse. "It's not what you think," he'd said, those steel-grey eyes pleading with her to understand. But how could she understand surveillance photos and the knowledge that the man she'd fallen in love with had been tracking her movements like prey? Now, staring at the positive pregnancy test, Sarah felt the walls of her small apartment closing in. She'd built this life carefully after escaping her past, the job at the veterinary clinic, the quiet routine, the safety of anonymity. Jake had shattered all of that, and now this unexpected pregnancy threatened to destroy what little peace she had left. Her phone buzzed against the bathroom counter. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and her heart hammered against her ribs. He'd been calling daily, leaving voicemails she couldn't bring herself to listen to. Each time she saw his number, she remembered the weight of his leather jacket around her shoulders, the way he'd held her after nightmares she'd never explained, the gentle roughness of his calloused hands. She declined the call, but the phone immediately rang again. Then again. On the 4th attempt, desperation overrode her resolve. "Stop calling me," she whispered into the phone. "Sarah, thank God. I need to see you." His voice was rough, strained in a way she'd never heard before. Something's happened. I don't care what's happened. We're done, Jake. I told you, your life is in danger. The words hit her like ice water. Sarah gripped the edge of the bathroom counter, the pregnancy test still lying at her feet like evidence of a crime. What are you talking about? I can't explain over the phone. Let me come up. You're here? She rushed to the living room window, peering down at the street. Jake's black Harley was parked across from her building, and she could see his tall figure pacing beside it. Even from 3 stories up, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept scanning the street like he expected trouble. I've been watching your building all night, he admitted. Sarah, there are people looking for you. Bad people. The kind who don't ask questions before they act. Her blood turned to ice. The careful life she'd built, the new identity, the distance from her past, somehow it was all unraveling. How do you know about... 30 seconds, Jake interrupted. Give me 30 seconds to explain, and if you don't believe me, I'll disappear forever. But right now, staying away from you might get you killed. Sarah's free hand drifted instinctively to her still flat stomach. The pregnancy test seemed to burn like a brand on the bathroom floor behind her. She thought of the baby growing inside her, thought of the threats she'd run from years ago, thought of Jake's surveillance photos and the protection she'd never asked for. Sarah, you still there? She watched him pace below, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he kept his hand near the inside of his jacket. He was armed. Jake was always armed, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt desperate. 1 minute, she said finally. But if you're lying to me, if this is some manipulation to get back into my life, it's not. His relief was audible. Buzz me up. Sarah ended the call and walked slowly to the intercom, her mind racing. She thought about running, about grabbing her go-bag from the bedroom closet and disappearing again. She'd done it before, vanished without a trace when the walls closed in. But she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, and now there was more than just her own life to consider. The buzzer echoed through her apartment like a death knell. Sarah pressed the button to unlock the building's front door, then opened her apartment and waited. She could hear Jake's heavy boots on the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and her heart hammered in rhythm with his approach. When he appeared in her doorway, she barely recognized the man who'd held her so tenderly just weeks ago. His face was haggard, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a fresh cut along his jawline that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," he said simply, and stepped inside. The courthouse steps felt like walking into a tomb. Maya's hand trembled as Jake helped her up the granite stairs, his leather jacket a stark contrast to her simple blue dress, the only thing in her closet that still fit properly at 4 months pregnant. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over his desperate proposal and the fear she'd seen flickering behind his steel-grey eyes. "You sure about this?" Jake's voice was rougher than usual, and she noticed the way his gaze kept scanning the street behind them. "Are you?" she shot back, studying his profile. The scar above his left eyebrow seemed more pronounced today, a reminder of the violence that shadowed his world. "Because you still haven't told me what's really going on." His jaw tightened. "After. I promise." The courthouse lobby buzzed with mundane activity. People paying parking tickets, filing permits, the ordinary business of living that felt surreal against the backdrop of whatever crisis had driven Jake to her door. Maya watched a young couple ahead of them, the bride in white lace, the groom beaming as they clutched their marriage license. She wondered if she'd ever have that kind of joy, that certainty. "Morrison," Jake told the clerk, his voice carrying the authority he wielded in the club. Even here, in this sterile government building, people seemed to sense the danger that clung to him like smoke. The waiting room was nearly empty, except for an elderly man reading a newspaper and a woman with tired eyes clutching divorce papers. Maya settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair, acutely aware of Jake's restless energy as he paced near the window. "Your baby daddy seems wound pretty tight," the woman with the divorce papers observed quietly, offering Maya a knowing look. He's not usually this. Maya paused, searching for the right word. Desperate, terrified, nervous. Honey, I've been married 3 times. That man's not nervous about marrying you. He's scared of something else entirely. Before Maya could respond, Jake was back at her side, his hand warm on her shoulder. They're ready for us. The ceremony was perfunctory, conducted by a bored-looking official who'd probably performed 1,000 similar rituals. Jake's hands were steady as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. When had he bought rings? But she felt the tension radiating from his body. Do you, Jacob Morrison, take Maya Catherine Rodriguez to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. The words came out fierce, almost defiant, as if Jake was daring the universe to try and stop him. When Maya spoke her own vows, she found herself looking into Jake's eyes, searching for answers he still wouldn't give. For just a moment, the fear disappeared from his expression, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that made her breath catch. You may kiss the bride. Jake's kiss was gentle, almost reverent, nothing like the hungry passion they'd shared before everything fell apart. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her cheek, and she realized she was crying. Mrs. Morrison, he murmured, and something in his tone made her chest tighten. They signed the papers in silence, Jake's bold signature a sharp contrast to her careful script. The rings felt foreign on her finger, a symbol of a marriage born from desperation rather than love. As they walked back through the courthouse, Maya caught sight of their reflection in a window, Jake dark and dangerous in his leather, her small and pale beside him, both of them looking like they were walking to an execution rather than celebrating. Jake, she stopped on the courthouse steps, suddenly unwilling to take another step until she had answers. I need to know what's happening. Right now. He glanced around nervously, then guided her toward his motorcycle. Not here. Too public. Then where? The cabin. It's safe there. He handed her a helmet, his expression grim. Maya, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to sound crazy. Crazier than you showing up at my apartment begging me to marry you? A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. Yeah, much crazier. The ride to Jake's cabin took them through winding mountain roads, past towering pines and glimpses of azure lake water. Maya had been here before, back when they were together, when Jake would bring her here to escape the noise and violence of club life. It had been their sanctuary then. Now it felt like a hiding place. Inside, Jake moved with practiced efficiency, checking locks, closing curtains, his military training evident in every economical movement. Maya watched him, her new wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Jake. He stopped, his hand frozen on the deadbolt. The Morrisons are cursed, Maya, have been for generations. His voice was barely above a whisper. And our baby might be the key to breaking it, or the sacrifice that makes it permanent. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Maya's feet as she descended them as Jake Morrison's wife. The weight of the simple gold band on her finger seemed heavier than the baby she carried, and twice as foreign. Jake walked beside her in silence, his leather jacket creaking with each step, the sound unnaturally loud in the afternoon stillness. That's it, then? Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. We're married? Jake's jaw tightened as he glanced at the marriage certificate folded in her trembling hands. For now. The casual cruelty of those 2 words hit her like a physical blow. She stopped walking, forcing him to turn back toward her. You know what, Jake? I changed my mind about that coffee. I want to go home. Maya. Wait. No. She held up her hand, the new wedding ring catching the weak sunlight. You got what you wanted. I signed the papers. Whatever game you're playing, whatever you're hiding from me, I don't want any part of it beyond what's legally required. Jake's eyes flashed with something that might have been pain, but it was gone so quickly Maya wondered if she'd imagined it. He stepped closer, and she caught that familiar scent of leather and engine oil that used to make her feel safe. Now it just reminded her of everything she'd lost. It's not a game, he said quietly. And I'm not hiding anything from you that won't put you in danger. Right, because you've always been so concerned about my safety. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Tell me something, Jake. When you decided to walk away 8 months ago, was this already part of your plan? The marriage, I mean. Did you always know you'd come crawling back when it was convenient? His hands clenched into fists at his sides. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to put you through? I don't know what you wanted. The words exploded out of her, 8 months of hurt and confusion, and sleepless nights pouring out all at once. I don't know anything about you, apparently. The Jake I thought I knew wouldn't have left without a word. He wouldn't have let me find out I was pregnant alone, and he sure as hell wouldn't have shown up at my door begging me to marry him while refusing to explain why. A muscle ticked in Jake's jaw, and for a moment she thought he might actually tell her the truth. Instead, he pulled out his phone and checked the time. I'll drive you home. Don't bother. I can call an Uber. Maya. His voice carried that edge of authority that used to make club prospects scramble to obey, but she was long past being intimidated by Jake Morrison. You're my wife now. That means you're under my protection whether you like it or not. I'm driving you home. The possessive way he said "my wife" sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. She'd once dreamed of hearing those words from him back when she'd been naive enough to believe in happily ever after with a man who lived by violence. Fine, she said, but this doesn't change anything between us. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. Jake's motorcycle sat parked across the street like a chrome and steel predator. Maya stared at it, memories flooding back of lazy Sunday rides through the mountains, her arms wrapped around his waist, the world rushing past in a blur of freedom and possibility. She'd felt invincible then, like nothing could touch them as long as they were together. I can't ride that, she said, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. Not anymore. Something flickered across Jake's features. Regret, maybe, or recognition of just how much had changed between them. He nodded toward a black pickup truck parked nearby. Borrowed Diesel's truck for today. Figured the bike wouldn't work. The fact that he'd thought ahead, that he'd planned for her pregnancy, somehow made everything worse. It meant he'd been thinking about her, about their baby, while making whatever calculated decisions had led to this moment. The drive to her apartment passed in suffocating silence. Maya stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets blur past while Jake's presence filled the cab of the truck like smoke. She could feel him stealing glances at her, but every time she looked his way, his attention was fixed firmly on the road. When he pulled up outside her building, Maya had her hand on the door handle before the engine stopped running. Maya, Jake's voice stopped her. I know you don't understand why I'm doing this, and I know you hate me for leaving, but everything I've done, everything I'm doing now, it's to protect you and our baby. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, searching his face for some sign of the man she'd once loved. From what, Jake? What are you protecting us from? For a heartbeat, she thought he might answer. Then his walls slammed back into place, and he was the Reaper again, cold, controlled, untouchable. Just trust me, he said. Maya laughed, the sound hollow and broken. Trust you? I don't even know you. The wedding dress hung in Sarah's closet like a ghost, its ivory silk mocking her with its pristine elegance. She'd bought it 3 years ago for a wedding that never happened, to a man who'd disappeared without explanation, leaving only tire tracks and broken promises. Now here she stood, 24 weeks pregnant, preparing to marry the same man who'd shattered her heart. Her fingers traced the delicate beading along the bodice. The dress would still fit, barely, though she'd need to leave the back partially unlaced. The irony wasn't lost on her, wearing a symbol of dreams deferred to enter a marriage built on desperation rather than love. A knock at her apartment door interrupted her brooding. Jake stood in the hallway, and Sarah's breath caught. Gone was his usual leather and denim uniform. Instead, he wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame, his dark hair tamed and styled. For a moment, she glimpsed the man he might have been in another life, one without motorcycles and whatever shadows he carried. You clean up nice, Reaper. she said, using his club name deliberately, a reminder to herself of who he really was. His grey eyes darkened at the nickname. Sarah, save it. She turned away, unable to look at him without remembering how he'd once promised her forever. We should go. City Hall closes at 4. The ride to the courthouse was silent except for the rumble of his Harley beneath them. Sarah's arms wrapped around his waist felt natural despite everything, muscle memory overriding common sense. She caught herself breathing in his familiar scent, leather and motor oil with an underlying warmth that was purely Jake. City Hall's sterile fluorescent lighting cast everything in harsh reality. They filled out paperwork with the efficiency of a business transaction, their signatures looking foreign on the marriage license. Sarah noticed Jake's hand trembling slightly as he signed, but when she looked up, his expression was unreadable stone. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. Judge Martinez, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, rattled through the standard vows with professional detachment. When she reached, "Do you, Jacob Morrison, take Sarah?" Sarah felt Jake's hand squeeze hers with surprising gentleness. "I do," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't identify. Sarah's own "I do" came out barely above a whisper. The baby chose that moment to kick, as if protesting the strange circumstances of its parents' union. "You may kiss the bride." Jake's lips brushed hers softly, almost reverently, nothing like the passionate kisses they'd once shared. But there was something else in the brief contact, desperation maybe, or regret. When he pulled away, his eyes held secrets she was beginning to fear she'd never understand. Outside the courthouse, reality crashed over them like cold water. They were married, legally bound. But nothing felt different except the unfamiliar weight of the simple gold band on her finger. "There's something you need to know," Jake said, his voice cutting through her thoughts, "about why this had to happen now." Before he could continue, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Sarah recognized the man who stepped out, Marcus Kane, the club's president, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Behind him emerged another figure that made Jake's entire body go rigid, a woman in her 60s with Jake's grey eyes and sharp cheekbones. "Mom," Jake breathed, the single word carrying years of complicated history. The woman's gaze moved between Jake and Sarah before settling on Sarah's rounded belly. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, but a hunger that made Sarah's skin crawl. "So this is her," the woman said, her voice cultured but cold. "The one carrying our family's future." "Eleanor," Marcus warned, but she ignored him. 24 weeks, Eleanor continued, as if Sarah wasn't standing right there. "Perfect timing. The bloodline will be preserved." "What bloodline?" Sarah demanded, her protective instincts flaring. "What are you talking about?" Jake stepped between them, his body language screaming danger. "That's enough. Sarah doesn't need to hear this." "Oh, but she does." Eleanor's smile was sharp as broken glass. "She's family now. She has a right to know what she's married into, what that baby represents." The air crackled with tension. Sarah felt like she was watching a chess match where she didn't understand the rules, but somehow she was the prize being fought over. "Jacob, you've done well," Eleanor continued, "but marriage is only the first step. The real work begins now. The child must be protected at all costs, and when the time comes—" "When the time comes for what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. Jake's hand found hers, his grip almost painful. "We're leaving now." But as they turned to go, Eleanor's voice followed them like a curse. "You can run, Jacob, but you can't escape what you are. What that baby will become. The Morrison legacy demands its due." The basement of the old Morrison family home smelled like decay and forgotten secrets. Lily descended the creaking wooden steps behind Jake, her hand trailing along the rough stone wall for balance. The single bare bulb cast dancing shadows that made her skin crawl. "Jake, I don't like this," she whispered, but he was already moving toward a heavy wooden chest in the corner, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Trust me, Lily. You need to see this. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion as he lifted the lid. Inside, yellowed papers and leather-bound journals lay stacked beneath what looked like ritual implements, candles, crystals, and something that might have been bones. Lily's breath caught. What is all this? Jake pulled out a leather journal, its cover worn smooth by countless hands. My family's history. The real history, not the bullshit stories they tell outsiders. He opened it carefully, pages crackling like autumn leaves. It goes back 7 generations, Lily. Every first-born Morrison male cursed. She leaned closer despite herself, squinting at the faded ink. The handwriting was old-fashioned, cramped. Names and dates filled the margins, but it was the detailed drawings that made her stomach lurch, symbols that matched the tattoo on Jake's chest, diagrams that looked disturbingly like anatomical studies. My great-great-great-grandfather, Thomas Morrison, made a deal, Jake continued, his finger tracing the text. He was dying, consumption eating him alive, and he had a newborn son. A woman came to him, called herself Morgana, promised to save his bloodline. Make us strong, resilient, give us power. What kind of power? Lily's voice barely rose above a whisper. Physical strength, healing abilities, longevity. Look at my dad. He's 73 and could still take down men half his age. My Uncle Rex survived a motorcycle accident that should have killed him, walked away without a scratch. Jake's jaw clenched. But everything has a price. He turned several pages, revealing a family tree drawn in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Red X's marked through most of the names. Every firstborn male dies before his 35th birthday, usually violent, always leaving behind a pregnant woman or newborn child to continue the line. Lily's hand instinctively moved to her belly. That's impossible. Curses aren't real. Tell that to my brother Marcus. Jake's voice cracked. Tell that to my cousin David or my Uncle Sam, all dead before 35, all left behind children. He looked up at her, and she saw raw terror in his eyes. I turned 35 in 6 weeks, Lily. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the shadows pressing closer. Lily sank onto an old wooden crate, legs trembling. This is insane. There has to be a logical explanation. Genetics, maybe, or... I thought so too. Jake pulled out another journal, newer than the first, until I started experiencing things, dreams about Morgana, visions of ways I might die. And then Vincent Kozlov showed up. The Russian? What does he have to do with any of this? Jake's expression darkened. His family has been hunting supernatural bloodlines for generations. They're collectors. They find people like us, study us, experiment on us. Vincent learned about the Morrison curse months ago. He's been waiting, watching, trying to figure out how to capture me alive so his people can dissect what makes us different. Lily's mind reeled. But why marry me? Why the fake ceremony? Because there's one way out. Jake flipped to the back of the journal, where fresh ink filled the final pages in his own handwriting. I've been researching for years, following leads, tracking down anyone who might know about Morgana or the original deal. Finally found an old woman in Salem who remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell. He pointed to a passage he'd underlined multiple times. The curse can be broken, but only under specific conditions. The firstborn male has to willingly sacrifice his supernatural gifts before his 35th birthday. He has to bind himself to someone pure of heart through genuine love, not just lust or obligation. And, Jake's voice dropped to barely audible, there has to be a child involved, an innocent life that represents hope for the future. Understanding crashed over Lily like a cold wave. Our baby. The marriage ritual creates a metaphysical bond. If we're truly married when I perform the sacrifice, the curse breaks. Our child will be the first Morrison in 7 generations born completely free. Jake closed the journal, his hands shaking slightly. But if Vincent gets to us first, if something happens before I can complete the ritual, the curse continues, Lily finished, and our daughter becomes the next generation bound to this nightmare. Footsteps echoed from upstairs, heavy boots on wooden floors. Jake tensed, instantly alert. "That's not my dad," a voice called down, thick with a Russian accent. "Come out, Morrison. Time to end this game of hide-and-seek." Jake grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the back corner of the basement, where a narrow window provided the only other exit. "Kozlov found us. We have to run. Now." The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Jake stood in the center of the cavernous space, his leather jacket hanging open, revealing the .45 holstered at his side. The Crimson Serpents had chosen their meeting place well, isolated, with multiple exit routes, and far from any prying eyes. Viper emerged from the shadows first, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. Behind him came 3 other members, their colors marking them as seasoned killers. Jake recognized Tommy Blade Henderson and Rico Vasquez, both men he'd tangled with before. The third was new, young and eager, probably looking to make his bones tonight. "Well, well," Viper drawled, his voice echoing in the empty space. "The mighty Reaper, all alone. Where's your club, Morrison? Where's your backup?" Jake kept his hands visible but ready. "This is between us, Viper. Always has been." "Is it?" Viper circled him slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "See, I've been doing some digging since our little chat. Found out some interesting things about you and that pretty little girlfriend of yours." Ice formed in Jake's stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. "Maya's got nothing to do with this." "Oh, but she does." Viper stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Jake could smell the whiskey on his breath. "She's carrying your kid, isn't she? Due any day now, from what I hear." The warehouse seemed to shrink around Jake. He'd been so careful, so meticulous about keeping Maya hidden, but somehow Viper had found out. The curse that had plagued the Morrison bloodline for 3 generations was about to claim another victim, his unborn child. "What do you want?" Jake's voice was deadly quiet. Viper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What I've always wanted. Your family's territory, your connections, and most importantly, your blood spilled on concrete. But now I get a bonus. I get to watch you suffer first." The young serpent shifted nervously, his hand moving toward his gun. Jake catalogued the movement without looking directly at him. 3 experienced fighters and 1 wild card. Not impossible odds, but close. "You remember my brother Danny, don't you, Jake?" Viper's voice turned venomous. "Remember putting a bullet in his head 5 years ago? He was dealing to kids outside schools." Jake replied flatly. He knew the rules. He was family. Viper's composure cracked, revealing the raw hatred beneath. "And tonight you're going to pay for that. But first, we're going to pay a visit to that little house on Maple Street. Make sure your woman knows exactly why she's about to become a widow." The mention of Maya's address hit Jake like a physical blow. They knew where she was. The safe house he'd arranged, all his precautions, none of it mattered if they'd already found her. "The thing is," Viper continued, "I know all about the Morrison family curse. My grandmother used to tell stories about it. 3 generations of firstborn sons, all meeting violent ends. Seems like tradition's about to repeat itself." Jake's blood turned to ice. The curse wasn't just family legend, it was real, and somehow Viper knew about it. The ritual his great-grandfather had performed, the deal made in desperation during the Great Depression, it had bound the Morrison bloodline to violence and early death. Every firstborn son had died before his 30th birthday, leaving behind grief and destruction. "You know what's funny?" Viper pulled out a switchblade, testing its edge with his thumb. "Your kid's going to grow up just like you did, fatherless, angry, destined for the same fate. Unless what? Unless the bloodline ends with you. See, curses need living vessels. No Morrison men left alive, no curse to pass down. I'd be doing that baby a favor." The pieces fell into place in Jake's mind with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about revenge for Danny's death. Viper knew about the supernatural forces that had shaped Jake's family for decades. He was planning to use that knowledge to destroy not just Jake, but Maya and their unborn child. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic. Jake's hand inched closer to his gun, calculating angles and distances. He'd trained for situations like this his entire adult life, but never with stakes this high. "Boys," Viper said without taking his eyes off Jake, "I think it's time we paid Mrs. Morrison a visit. See how she's feeling about becoming a single mother." That's when Jake moved. His .45 cleared leather as he dove behind a rusted shipping container, bullets sparking off metal where his head had been a split second before. The war for his family's survival had begun, and Jake knew that everything, Maya's life, his child's future, and the very soul of the Morrison bloodline, hung in the balance. The curse had claimed his father and grandfather, but it wouldn't claim his son. The abandoned warehouse reeked of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Sophia's wrists burned against the zip ties binding her to the metal chair, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror clawing at her chest. Every protective instinct she possessed screamed for her unborn child, the baby who'd become an unwitting pawn in a game she barely understood. Marcus paced before her like a predator savoring its kill, his designer shoes echoing in the hollow space. The man who'd once been Jake's brother, his blood, his family, now wore madness like a second skin. The transformation was complete, his eyes holding the same wild hunger she'd seen in their father's old photographs. "You know, I used to wonder what it would feel like," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. "The power our bloodline carries. Father always said it would choose one of us, but Jake was born first." Jake got everything. He stopped pacing, turning those hollow eyes toward her. "But birthright means nothing when you're dead." Sophia forced herself to meet his gaze, drawing strength from the life growing inside her. "Jake will find me." "Oh, I'm counting on it." Marcus smiled, the expression devoid of warmth. "He's probably tearing through every contact he has right now, following the breadcrumbs I so carefully laid out. The Reaper, so predictable in his devotion." Through the warehouse's skeletal structure, she could hear the distant rumble of motorcycles. Her heart leaped, but Marcus only chuckled. Right on schedule. He pulled out his phone, fingers dancing across the screen. The beauty of knowing someone their entire life is understanding exactly how they think. Jake believes he's hunting me, but really he's walking straight into my trap. The warehouse doors exploded inward with a crash that shook dust from the rafters. Jake burst through first, his face a mask of controlled fury, followed by Tank and 3 other club members. Their weapons were drawn, but Marcus had positioned himself behind Sophia, one hand resting on her shoulder with deceptive gentleness. "Let her go, Marcus." Jake's voice cut through the space like a blade. "This is between us." "Is it?" Marcus's fingers trailed down Sophia's arm, and she had to fight not to recoil. "See, that's where you're wrong, brother. This stopped being about us the moment she conceived. That child she carries, it's the key to everything." Jake stepped closer, his gun steady. "You've lost your mind." "Have I? Or have I finally seen clearly?" Marcus's grip tightened on Sophia's shoulder. Father's journals explained it all. The Morrison curse isn't a burden, Jake. It's evolution. The darkness that claimed him, that twisted his mind. It's not insanity, it's power. Raw, untapped power that skips generations, waiting for the perfect vessel. "Dad was sick," Jake said. But Sophia heard the tremor in his voice. The doctors confirmed it. Chemical imbalances. Genetic predisposition to... Lies! Marcus's composure cracked, revealing the madness beneath. They couldn't understand what he was becoming. "But I studied his notes, Jake. I studied them for years while you ran from the truth. The darkness chooses one Morrison per generation, and it's chosen me." The other bikers had fanned out, surrounding them, but Marcus seemed unconcerned. If anything, he appeared to relish the attention. "That baby," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "carries Morrison blood. Fresh blood, untainted by years of denial and fear. When it's born, when I perform the ritual Father outlined in his journals, the power will transfer completely. I'll become what our bloodline was always meant to be." Sophia's blood turned to ice. "You're talking about murdering a child." "I'm talking about transcendence." Marcus's hand moved to rest on her stomach, and this time she couldn't suppress her shudder of revulsion. One small sacrifice to unlock centuries of potential. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "Get your hands off her." "Or what? You'll shoot me? Go ahead, Jake. But remember—" Marcus shifted, using Sophia as a shield. "I'm the only one who knows where all the pieces of Father's research are hidden. Kill me, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering when the curse will manifest in your child, wondering if every tantrum, every moment of anger, is the beginning of something darker." The warehouse fell silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the shadows. Sophia could see the torment in Jake's eyes, the impossible choice Marcus had forced upon him. Save her now and risk their child's future, or find another way that might cost them everything. "There is another option," Marcus said softly. "Join me, embrace what we are, instead of fighting it. Together, we can guide the child, shape its power. The Morrison name could rule instead of hide." Jake's answer came without hesitation. "Never." "Then you've doomed us all." Marcus reached into his jacket, and Sophia saw the glint of metal. Starting with her. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting fractured moonlight across the concrete floor. Maya's hands trembled as she followed Jake deeper into the shadows, every instinct screaming at her to run. But the blood on his jacket and the desperation in his eyes kept her moving forward. "Tell me everything," she whispered, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "No more lies, Jake. Not now." He stopped beside a support beam, his broad shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. When he turned to face her, the moonlight revealed the full extent of his injuries, a deep gash across his temple, bruises blooming along his jaw, and something darker in his eyes than she'd ever seen before. "The Morrison family has carried a curse for 7 generations, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every firstborn male dies before their 30th birthday, usually in violence. My father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. All of them gone by 30. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "That's superstition, Jake. You can't seriously believe—" "My 29th birthday was 3 months ago." His words cut through her protest like a blade. "And our baby, if it's a boy, he'll carry the same fate." The warehouse seemed to close in around them. Maya leaned against the cold concrete wall, her mind reeling. "Even if I believed in curses, which I don't, what does that have to do with the serpents trying to kill us?" Jake ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving streaks of blood from his split knuckles. "There's a way to break it. An old ritual, older than the clubs, older than this town. But it requires—" He paused, struggling with the words. "It requires the willing sacrifice of someone who carries Morrison blood." "Sacrifice?" The word came out as barely a breath. "Not death," he said quickly, seeing the terror in her eyes. "But something almost as costly. The Morrison heir has to give up everything. Their name, their family, their past. They have to die symbolically, be reborn as someone else entirely. And it has to happen before the child is born." Maya stared at him, trying to process the impossible. "That's why you wanted to marry me. Not for protection, but for some ancient ritual." At first, yes. His honesty was brutal, unflinching. The marriage is part of it. The curse can only be broken by someone who chooses love over blood, who's willing to sacrifice everything for a family that isn't bound by the Morrison name. And the serpents. Jake's expression darkened further. "They know about the curse. They've known for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. If they kill me before the ritual can be completed, the curse transfers to any Morrison blood, including our child. They want to control that power, use it as a weapon." A sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on gravel, low voices carrying on the night air. Jake immediately moved to shield Maya, his body tense and ready for violence. "How do I know any of this is real?" she whispered against his back. "How do I know you're not just—" Because 3 weeks ago I started having the dreams. His voice was hollow, resigned. Every Morrison male gets them as their 30th birthday approaches, dreams of how they'll die, and in every single one, I see the serpents coming for you and the baby because I failed to protect you. The footsteps were getting closer. Jake pulled out his phone, quickly typing something before handing it to her. On the screen was a photo of an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "My father's diary," he explained, "and his father's before him. They all wrote about the dreams, the curse, the failed attempts to break it. My grandfather tried to run from it, changed his name, moved across the country. They found him anyway. My father tried to fight it head-on, gathering allies, building an army. He died in a shootout with the serpents when I was 12. Maya scrolled through the images, seeing decades of desperate handwriting, sketches of symbols she didn't recognize, and photographs of Morrison men who all shared Jake's dark eyes and haunted expression. "The ritual," she said finally. "What exactly does it involve?" "A blood binding during the new moon, which is tomorrow night. We have to marry under the old rites, not just the legal ceremony. I have to renounce my claim to the Morrison name and legacy, transfer my protection to you and the baby, and then—" He hesitated. "Then what?" "Then I have to disappear, become someone else entirely. The Jake Morrison you knew has to die, at least on paper. It's the only way to break the chain." The footsteps had stopped directly outside. Maya could hear hushed voices, the click of weapons being readied. In that moment, staring at the man she'd loved and lost and maybe loved again, she made the decision that would change everything. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Jake's eyes widened in shock and desperate hope, just as the warehouse doors exploded inward. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a tomb as Elena followed Jake through the rusted entrance. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where their child grew stronger each day. The musty air carried the scent of old motor oil and something darker, something that made her skin crawl. "This is where it all started," Jake said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Shafts of moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting eerie shadows across stacked crates and forgotten machinery. "My grandfather's first garage." Elena pulled her jacket tighter. After everything Marcus had revealed about Jake's family curse, she'd demanded the truth, all of it. Now, standing in this place that felt heavy with secrets and sorrow, she wondered if she was ready. Jake moved toward a wall covered by a tattered tarp. With one swift motion, he pulled it away, revealing a collection of photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents pinned to the concrete. Elena's breath caught as she took in the display, a shrine to tragedy. "The Morrison family tree," Jake said bitterly. "Every generation, Elena. Look at them." She stepped closer, studying the faded photographs. Men with Jake's dark eyes and strong jawline stared back at her, their faces haunted. Newspaper headlines told the story. "Local businessman dies in mysterious fire. Father of 2 found dead at construction site. Police baffled by 3rd Morrison death." "Your father?" she whispered, pointing to a more recent photo. "Car accident when I was 16. Same age his father was when his dad died." Jake's jaw clenched. "The pattern never breaks, Elena. Every Morrison man dies violently, always leaving behind a pregnant woman or newborn child." Elena's legs felt weak. She sank onto a nearby crate, her mind reeling. "But that's impossible. Curses aren't real. Tell that to 6 generations of Morrison widows." Jake knelt beside her, his eyes desperate. "I know how it sounds, but I've seen things, Elena. Felt things. The closer your due date gets, the stronger it becomes." "What becomes?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. "The dreams started 3 weeks ago. Always the same. I'm dying, and you're screaming my name. But it's not just dreams anymore. Yesterday, a steel beam fell at the construction site where I was collecting payment, missed me by inches. Last night, my bike's brakes failed, going down Miller's Hill." Elena's blood ran cold. She remembered that hill, the sharp curves, the deadly drop-off. "Jake." I'm being hunted, Elena, by something I can't fight, can't reason with. And according to the family records, I have until our baby is born to figure out how to break this thing, or... A loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Jake was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the gun at his waist. "Stay behind me." They moved carefully through the shadows, Elena's heart hammering against her ribs. Another sound, footsteps on metal stairs. Jake pushed her behind a stack of wooden pallets, just as voices drifted down from the warehouse's upper level. "You sure he's here?" The voice was unfamiliar, rough with a slight accent. Marcus said this is where Morrison goes when he needs to think. Elena recognized this second voice. Tommy Briggs, one of Jake's club brothers. Jake's face went pale. He pulled Elena deeper into the shadows, his lips against her ear. "Tommy's working with someone. This isn't about the curse." "What's the plan if we find him?" the first voice asked. "Simple. Morrison's been asking too many questions about the Rodriguez deal. Boss thinks he's getting ready to flip, maybe cut a deal with the feds. We eliminate the problem tonight." Elena felt Jake's entire body tense beside her. She grabbed his arm, knowing he was calculating whether he could take both men. But she also knew the odds. Jake was good, but not superhuman. "There's another way out," he whispered, pointing toward a service door partially hidden behind machinery. "We move now, while they're upstairs." They crept toward the exit, Elena's pregnancy making her movements awkward. She stumbled slightly, her shoe scraping against a loose piece of metal. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. The voices above stopped. What was that? Jake grabbed Elena's hand and ran. Behind them, heavy footsteps pounded down metal stairs. They burst through the service door into the night air just as shouts erupted from the warehouse. Jake's motorcycle was parked 50 yards away, but Elena knew she'd never make it running. Her heart sank as she heard the warehouse door slam open behind them. "This way," Jake hissed, pulling her toward a cluster of shipping containers. They ducked between them just as flashlight beams swept the area where they'd been standing. Elena pressed her back against the cold metal, her breathing ragged. Jake's face was grim as he checked his phone. No signal. They were trapped, with armed men hunting them and no way to call for help. "Jake," she whispered, "what if this isn't about any curse? What if someone's been making the Morrison deaths look like accidents for generations?" His eyes widened as the implications hit him. The footsteps were getting closer. The midnight air cut through Maya's jacket as she followed Jake through the abandoned warehouse district, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every shadow seemed to pulse with menace, every distant sound making her jump. Jake moved with predatory grace ahead of her, his hand never straying far from the gun tucked beneath his leather jacket. "Tell me again why we couldn't wait until morning," Maya whispered, one hand instinctively protecting her rounded belly. They approached a decrepit building with boarded windows, its brick facade crumbling like ancient skin. Jake paused at a rusted door, pressing his ear against the metal before producing a set of lockpicks from his pocket. Jake Maya grabbed his arm. What if this is exactly what he wants? What if we're walking into a trap? His green eyes found hers in the pale moonlight, and for a moment she saw past the hardened enforcer to the scared boy beneath. "Then we face it together. But Maya, I need you to promise me something. If things go sideways in there, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Just run. I'm not leaving you. You're not just protecting yourself anymore." His gaze dropped to her stomach, where their child grew stronger each day. The baby is the key to breaking this curse, but only if it survives. The lock clicked open with a soft snick. Jake pushed the door inward, revealing a corridor shrouded in darkness. The smell hit them immediately, something between incense and decay with an underlying metallic tang that made Maya's stomach lurch. They crept forward, Jake's phone flashlight casting dancing shadows on peeling wallpaper. Ancient symbols had been carved into the walls, some fresh enough that wood shavings still littered the floor. Maya recognized a few from the journal they'd discovered: protection wards, binding spells, and something else that made her skin crawl. "Blood magic," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. The Morrison curse isn't just about early death, it's about sacrifice. Jake nodded grimly. Every generation, the firstborn son dies young, and his life force feeds the magic that keeps Elias alive. But if the bloodline produces an heir before the sacrifice is complete, the curse breaks. Maya's hand flew to her belly again. That's why he's so desperate. If our baby is born while you're still alive, he loses his immortality. A slow clap echoed from the darkness ahead of them. Clever girl. I always said the Reaper chose well. Elias stepped into their flashlight beam, looking exactly as he had 30 years ago when Jake's father died. Ageless, perfectly groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Behind him stood 3 figures in dark robes, their faces hidden in shadow. Uncle Jake's voice carried decades of hatred. I was wondering when you'd show yourself. Family reunion, Elias smiled, revealing teeth too white and too sharp. How touching. And you brought the lovely Maya. My dear, you look positively radiant. Pregnancy suits you. Maya stepped closer to Jake, feeling the coiled tension in his muscles. What do you want? Want? Elias laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. I want what I've always taken, what is mine by right. The Morrison bloodline has fed my power for over a century, and your little domestic fantasy won't change that. Jake pulled out his gun in one fluid motion, but the robed figures moved faster, raising their hands in unison. The weapon flew from his grip, clattering across the concrete floor. Tisk, tisk. Did you really think bullets would work here? This place is consecrated ground now, nephew. My domain. Elias began walking in a slow circle around them. I've prepared for this moment for decades. Did you think your father's journal contained all my secrets? That little rebellion of his barely scratched the surface. Maya felt something shifting in the air around them, a pressure that made her ears pop. The symbols on the walls began to glow with sick green light, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The ritual can go one of 2 ways, Elias continued conversationally. The traditional sacrifice, where you die tonight and I absorb another generation of life force. Or, his eyes fixed on Maya with predatory hunger, we try something new. Your child's untainted Morrison blood, freely given, could grant me permanent immortality. No more waiting for heirs to mature. No more uncertainty. Over my dead body, Jake snarled. That can be arranged. Elias raised his hand, and Jake dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as if something was squeezing his heart. Maya watched in horror as the man she loved gasped for air, his face contorting in agony. The glow from the wall symbols intensified, and she felt her baby kick frantically, as if sensing the danger. "Stop!" she screamed. "Please, just stop!" Elias lowered his hands slightly, and Jake gulped air like a drowning man. The choice is yours, my dear. His life or your child's power. Choose quickly. The new moon won't wait. The ancient cemetery lay shrouded in morning mist, its weathered headstones emerging from the fog like broken teeth. Sarah's hand trembled as she traced the worn inscription on Ezra Morrison's grave, the letters barely visible after decades of wind and rain. Jake stood behind her, his leather jacket creaking as he shifted nervously. "This is where it all started," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 1847, the year my family's curse began. Sarah turned to face him, her other hand instinctively protecting her growing belly. "Tell me everything, Jake. No more half-truths." He knelt beside the grave, pulling away dead leaves and debris from the headstone. Ezra Morrison was a preacher's son who fell in love with a woman named Morgana. She was different. People called her a witch, said she could see things others couldn't. When the townspeople found out about their relationship, they drove her out. The wind picked up, rustling through the bare branches overhead. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around herself as Jake continued. Ezra tried to follow her, but his father and the other men caught him. They beat him nearly to death and locked him in the church basement for 3 days. When they finally let him out, Morgana was gone. He searched for months, but never found her. What happened to him? Jake's jaw clenched. He went mad with grief, started having visions, claimed Morgana was calling to him from beyond death. One night, he walked into the forest and never came back. They found his body 3 days later, hanging from an oak tree. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. But that's not the end of the story, is it? No. Jake stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Before Morgana left, she was pregnant, with Ezra's child. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind, a horrible pattern emerging from the Morrison family history. She cursed the bloodline. Every Morrison man since Ezra has died before his 30th birthday. Car crashes, overdoses, violence. It always looks like an accident or bad luck, but there's always been a pattern. The closer they get to 30, the stronger the curse becomes. Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank onto a nearby stone bench, her mind reeling. "You're 29, Jake. 29 years, 11 months, and 16 days, he said grimly. I turned 30 in exactly 2 weeks, but our baby breaks the cycle. Jake moved to sit beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Doc found it in the old records. When a Morrison child is born to a woman carrying both Morrison and Blackwood blood, the curse is broken. Your grandmother was a Blackwood, Sarah. That's why I came back to you. The words hit her like a physical blow. You're only with me because of my bloodline? Her voice cracked with betrayal and hurt. Jake's response was fierce, immediate. That's not why I love you. That's not why I've loved you since we were teenagers. But when Doc told me about the curse, about what was happening to me, I realized it wasn't coincidence that brought us together. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing between the headstones. This is insane, Jake. Curses aren't real. This is just a series of coincidences, family trauma passed down through generations. Her words were cut off by a sharp crack from above. A massive tree branch, seemingly healthy moments before, came crashing down exactly where she'd been sitting. If she hadn't moved when she did, it would have killed them both. Jake was on his feet instantly, pulling her away from the tree. Still think it's coincidence? Sarah stared at the fallen branch, her heart hammering. How do you know the baby will break the curse? How can you be sure? Because it's already started. Jake showed her his hands. The cuts and bruises from the bar fight were completely healed, as if they'd never existed. Since you've been pregnant, since we've been together as a family, I can feel it weakening. The accidents have stopped, the nightmares are fading, but you said marriage was part of it. Jake nodded toward Ezra's grave. He never got the chance to marry Morgana. The curse can only be broken by undoing what was left undone. A Morrison man claiming his family before his 30th birthday. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if responding to their conversation. Despite everything rational in her mind screaming that this was impossible, she couldn't deny what she'd witnessed. The branch, Jake's healing, the strange dreams she'd been having about a woman in white calling her name. If we do this, she said slowly, if we get married and the curse is really broken, what happens to us after? Do we stay married out of obligation? Jake cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes intense. We stay married because I love you more than my own life. The curse brought me back to you. But love is what's keeping me here. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah pressed her back against the kitchen counter, one hand protectively curved over her belly as Jake paced like a caged wolf. The revelation about the blood curse had shattered everything she thought she knew about reality, leaving her world tilted on its axis. So let me get this straight, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your family is cursed to die violent deaths unless the bloodline is broken by a child born under specific circumstances, and our baby is the key to ending it all. Jake finished, running his hands through his dark hair. Born to parents who love each other but aren't blood relatives of the Morrison line. Born during the new moon. Born while the curse is still active. Sarah's legs felt weak. And if we don't break it? Jake's jaw clenched. I die before our child's first birthday. Violently. It's how it's always been. The weight of his words settled between them like a physical thing. Sarah thought of all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering why he'd pushed her away, why he'd chosen the club over their relationship. Now she understood. He'd been trying to protect her from this nightmare. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Would you have believed me?" Jake's green eyes met hers, and she saw the exhaustion there, the fear he'd been carrying alone. 3 months ago, if I'd told you my family was cursed by some ancient witch, you'd have called the psych ward. He was right, and they both knew it. Sarah had always been logical, grounded in facts and evidence. The supernatural had been relegated to movies and books, until Marcus's men had come after her with their strange tattoos and whispered incantations. "The club knows," she said, pieces clicking together. "That's why they've been protecting you." Jake nodded grimly. "Some of them. The older members remember my father, my grandfather. They've seen what happens when the curse claims us." He stopped pacing, his hands clenching into fists. "But there are others who think the curse is bullshit, who want to use our situation for their own gain. Marcus. Marcus." Jake's voice turned lethal. "He's been working with someone inside the club, feeding them information about the ritual we need to perform. If they can prevent the curse from being broken, they think they can control me, make me desperate enough to do anything." Sarah's mind raced. "The ritual, what does it involve?" Jake hesitated, and that pause told her more than words could. "The baby has to be born at the exact moment of the new moon. We have to be married, truly bonded, and—" he swallowed hard. "I have to face the curse head-on, draw it out and destroy it. What does that mean exactly?" "I don't know." The admissions seem to cost him. "The instructions we have are old, incomplete. My grandmother tried to break it for my father, but she failed. The curse adapted, became stronger." Sarah felt the baby move inside her, a flutter of life that reminded her how much was at stake. "When's the next new moon?" 4 days. 4 days. Her due date wasn't for another 2 weeks, but babies came when they wanted to come. And if the timing isn't perfect, Jake's silence was answer enough. The sound of gravel crunching outside made them both freeze. Jake was at the window in 2 quick strides, peering through the blinds. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Rico and Tommy," he said, but his hand remained on the gun at his hip. "They're supposed to be watching the perimeter." The front door opened, and Rico stepped inside, his usually jovial face grim. "We've got problems, brother. Marcus's men hit the clubhouse an hour ago. They didn't find what they were looking for, but they left a message." He handed Jake a blood-stained piece of paper. Jake's face went white as he read it. "What does it say?" Sarah demanded. Jake crumpled the paper in his fist. "They have Elena." Sarah's heart stopped. Elena was Jake's younger sister, barely 21, who worked at a veterinary clinic in the next town over. She was innocent, had nothing to do with the club or the curse. "They want to trade," Rico continued. "Elena for Sarah and the baby. Tomorrow night, at the old Morrison property where your great-grandmother was killed." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The curse had started there, in that cursed ground, and now Marcus wanted to end it there, but on his terms. "It's a trap," Tommy said from the doorway, his young face hard with anger. "They'll kill Elena no matter what." Jake's phone buzzed. He answered it with a sharp, "Yeah?" Sarah watched his expression change from anger to something approaching despair. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "That was Elena," he said quietly. "She's alive but barely conscious. They've done something to her, drugged her or worse." He looked at Sarah with tortured eyes. "They're accelerating everything. If we don't show up tomorrow night, she dies. And if we do, we all die," Sarah finished. But even as the words left her lips, she felt the baby shift inside her, and a strange certainty settled over her. Maybe it was maternal instinct, or maybe it was something deeper, but she knew their child was listening, waiting, preparing for the battle to come. The old church stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its Gothic spires piercing the grey sky like ancient sentinels. Sarah clutched Jake's hand as they approached the heavy wooden doors. her other hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. The baby had been unusually active all night, as if sensing the momentous events about to unfold. "You sure this will work?" she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Jake's jaw was set in grim determination. "It has to. The blood moon rises in 3 hours, and if we're not bound by then—" He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what would happen. Father Mackenzie waited for them in the candle-lit sanctuary, his weathered face grave with understanding. Behind him, ancient symbols were carved into the altar stone, symbols that predated Christianity by centuries. The Morrison family curse was older than any religion, woven into the very fabric of their bloodline. "The child moves strongly," the priest observed, his eyes kind but knowing. "She feels the pull of her heritage." "She?" Sarah's eyes widened. They hadn't known the baby's gender. Jake squeezed her hand. "A daughter changes everything. The curse passes through the female line, but it can also be broken by one." The massive doors groaned open behind them, and Marcus Morrison stepped into the sanctuary. Jake tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his back, but his grandfather raised empty palms. "I'm not here to stop you, boy," Marcus said quietly. "I'm here to witness the end of our family's shame." Behind him came other figures, club members, family, and surprisingly, Detective Rodriguez. Sarah's eyes met the detective's, finding unexpected support there. "I've been investigating the Morrison deaths for 2 years, Rodriguez said. 17 men, all dying on their 30th birthday, all leaving pregnant women behind. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Jake's 30th birthday was tomorrow." Father Mackenzie opened an ancient leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "The ritual must be performed exactly. Any deviation, and the curse will claim not just Jake, but the child as well." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What aren't you telling me?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice heavy with decades of guilt. "The original curse was cast by a woman scorned, a witch whose daughter was murdered by the first Morrison. She bound our bloodline to death and violence, ensuring that every generation would know loss. But she left one escape clause. True love," Jake said softly. "A willing marriage born of genuine love, performed at the moment of the blood moon's peak, blessed by the innocent blood of an unborn daughter." Sarah's hand flew to her belly. "Blessed by? You mean she has to—" "No," Father Mackenzie interrupted quickly. "Not death, life. The child must be born during the ceremony. The magic requires a birth, not a death." Sarah stared at them all in shock. "Now? She's not due for another month?" "The curse doesn't follow medical timelines," Marcus explained. "It follows magical ones. Your body will know what to do." As if summoned by his words, Sarah gasped as her first contraction hit. The baby was coming. Jake caught her as she doubled over. "I've got you. We can do this." The next hour passed in a blur of pain, candlelight, and ancient words. Father Mackenzie's voice rose and fell in Latin while Sarah labored, Jake never leaving her side. The other witnesses formed a protective circle around them, their presence somehow vital to the ritual's success. As the blood moon reached its peak, visible through the stained glass windows, Sarah gave one final push. Their daughter entered the world with a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. "Now," Father Mackenzie commanded, "speak the vows now while her first breath mingles with the moonlight." Through tears and exhaustion, Sarah and Jake spoke words of love and commitment that carried the weight of centuries. The baby's cries softened to gentle mewling as Jake carefully took her in his arms. "I name you Luna Morrison," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Breaker of curses, daughter of love." The change was immediate and unmistakable. The oppressive weight that had hung over the church lifted like fog before sunlight. Marcus Morrison's shoulders straightened as decades of guilt fell away. Jake's face, which had carried the shadow of impending death for months, cleared with hope. "It's done," Father Mackenzie said simply. "The bloodline is free." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward with a soft smile. I suppose my investigation is officially closed. Sarah cradled their daughter, marveling at the perfect tiny features. She's beautiful. Jake knelt beside them, his family complete at last. She's our miracle. Outside, the blood moon faded as dawn approached, taking with it the last remnants of a curse that had plagued generations. The Morrison family was finally free to choose love over violence, life over death. In her parents' arms, Luna slept peacefully, unaware that she had already saved more lives than she would ever know.